The year was 2147, and the world was dying. Crops that had once thrived in lush fields were now lifeless stalks crumbling into dust. The Great Blight, a bioengineered pathogen released accidentally during an agricultural experiment, had spread across the globe in just 3 years. Humanity, once masters of Earth, now scavenged its remains, struggling to survive. On the outskirts of what was once Ohio, an old greenhouse stood resilient against the wasteland. Its curved glass walls were patched with mismatched materials, aluminum sheets, scrap metal, and even discarded plastic bags. Inside, rows of vibrant green tomato plants climbed makeshift trellises. They were the last thriving crop known to humanity, tended to by a man everyone called the Tomato Man. His real name was Dr. Elias Thorne, a former agricultural scientist who had retreated to the countryside long before the blight hit. Rumors about him spread across the wasteland, a recluse who had somehow unlocked nature's secrets. Survivors whispered of tomatoes the size of grapefruits, their skins gleaming like polished rubies, and their taste of forgotten joy in a barren world. Elias sat on a stool, his gnarled hands deftly inspecting a cluster of tomatoes. A faint hum filled the greenhouse, a mix of old solar-powered fans and the buzz of insects. He muttered to himself, recording observations into a battered voice recorder. Specimen 42 shows resistance to fungal decay and soil salinity, he said, his voice low but steady. Pollination rates remain high despite atmospheric toxins. Outside, the world had become a graveyard. Once thriving cities were now skeletal remains overtaken by dust storms and roving bands of desperate survivors. But here in this small haven, life still clung on. A visitor arrives. Elias' routine was interrupted by a sound he hadn't heard in months, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. He straightened, his heart quickening. Visitors were rare and rarely good news. Reaching for an old shotgun propped by the greenhouse door, he stepped outside. A woman stood at the edge of his property. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, with sunburned skin and a rifle slung over her shoulder. Her clothes were patched and dusty, but her stance was firm, her eyes sharp. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, raising her hands. "My name is Mara. I heard you have seeds." Elias studied her, his grip on the shotgun tightening. "And who told you that?" "A trader in the south," Mara replied. He said, "There's a man growing tomatoes out here." He said, "You might be willing to share or sell." Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. "If you're looking for food, you've come to the wrong place. I don't have enough to spare." "I'm not asking for food," Mara said, taking a cautious step forward. "I'm asking for a chance. I've got people back home. Kids, they're starving. If you have seeds, even a handful, I can start planting. We can rebuild." Elias hesitated. The woman's words stirred something in him, a memory of his own family, long gone. But trust was a scarce commodity, and desperation made people dangerous. "Seeds like these don't come free," he said finally. "What do you have to trade?" Mara unslung her pack and laid it on the ground. She pulled out a small vial filled with a pale green liquid. "Algae concentrate," she said. "It's not much, but it's high calorie. Enough to keep you going for weeks." Elias's eyes narrowed. Algae farming was one of the few industries that had survived the blight, but even it was failing as water sources became contaminated. The vial was valuable not just for its contents, but for what it represented: effort, ingenuity, and survival. "Come inside," he said, lowering the shotgun. "Let's talk." The seeds of survival. Inside the greenhouse, Mara stared in awe at the rows of tomatoes. "I haven't seen anything like this in years," she murmured. Elias moved to a workbench, pulling out a small tin box. Inside were seeds, each one encased in a protective shell of biopolymer. He held one up between his fingers. "These aren't ordinary seeds," he said. "I developed them before the blight hit. They're resistant to pathogens, can grow in poor soil, and require minimal water." "But there's more to it than that." Mara leaned in, curiosity overcoming her caution. "What do you mean?" Elias hesitated. He had kept the truth hidden for years, but something about Mara's determination made him reconsider. "The seeds were created using alien DNA," he said finally. "Decades ago, a meteorite crashed near this area. It contained microbial life unlike anything on Earth. I studied it, spliced its genes with terrestrial crops. These tomatoes and their seeds are the result." Mara's eyes widened. "Alien DNA? You're serious?" "Deadly serious," Elias replied. "The microbes had unique properties: self-repair, adaptability, resistance to toxins. When the blight started spreading, I knew these seeds might be our only hope, but I couldn't trust anyone with them. Not until now." "Why now?" Mara asked. "Because you're not here for profit," Elias said, meeting her gaze. "You're here for survival. And if we're going to survive, we need to start somewhere. A fragile alliance. Elias gave Mara a handful of seeds and detailed instructions on how to grow them. He warned her of the challenges ahead, jealous neighbors, opportunistic raiders, and the constant threat of environmental collapse. But he also offered hope. If these seeds thrive, he said, you'll have something no one else does, a chance to rebuild, to grow food that can sustain us. But you'll need to protect it. Mara nodded, her determination unwavering. I'll protect them with my life. As she prepared to leave, Elias handed her a small radio. If you run into trouble, call me. I'll do what I can. Mara hesitated, then extended her hand. Thank you, Elias. You might have just saved us all. Elias watched as she disappeared into the horizon, her silhouette a beacon of hope against the desolate landscape. He turned back to his greenhouse, knowing that his isolation was over. The seeds were out in the world now, and with them, a fragile thread of survival and change. Roots of change. In the weeks that followed, Elias' radio crackled to life with updates from Mara. The seeds had taken root, their growth astonishing even in the poor soil of her community. Word spread, and soon others came seeking Elias' help. Some came with gratitude, others with greed. Elias knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. The seeds he had nurtured were more than just plants. They were symbols of resilience, of humanity's capacity to adapt and endure. As he stood in his greenhouse, surrounded by the vibrant green of his tomatoes, Elias Thorne allowed himself a rare smile. The world was broken, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could still be healed. Elias Thorne hadn't meant to stumble into a discovery that could save or doom the world. His journey began in 2115, decades before the Great Blight turned Earth into a wasteland. At the time, he was just an ambitious geneticist, passionate about combating global food shortages. His innovative work had caught the attention of governments and corporations, but his breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the heavens themselves. The meteorite. One night, a meteorite streaked across the Appalachian sky and crash-landed in a dense forest. Its arrival was unassuming, a fiery flash, a distant rumble, but it contained secrets far beyond human understanding. Local authorities dismissed it as space debris, but satellite scans detected faint, anomalous energy readings. Elias's lab, always on the lookout for potential biological oddities, was alerted. He led a small team to the site, trekking through charred trees and smoldering earth. At the crater's center lay a metallic black rock, pocked with iridescent veins that shimmered under the sunlight. The meteorite radiated faint warmth, and its surface pulsed as though alive. Samples were carefully extracted and transported to Elias's lab under strict quarantine protocols. What he found was astonishing. Within the rock's porous structure thrived alien microbial life, organisms unlike anything on Earth. These microbes displayed unparalleled adaptability, thriving in extreme temperatures, high radiation, and toxic environments. They repaired themselves rapidly, evolving in real time to overcome challenges. Elias theorized that these microbes had evolved to survive the harsh conditions of space. If we can integrate their resilience into our crops, Elias wrote in his journal, we might achieve true agricultural immortality. Forbidden experiments. Elias began splicing the microbes' genetic material in tomato plants. His choice was deliberate. Tomatoes were genetically simple, fast-growing, and globally cultivated. Early results were mixed. The first generation of plants grew uncontrollably, their vines twisting and splitting under their own weight. But Elias refined his techniques, and soon the plants stabilized. The tomatoes they bore were unlike anything he'd ever seen, larger, brighter, and rich in nutrients. However, not everyone was thrilled. Rumors of Elias's experiments reached his superiors, and an ethics committee was convened. They accused him of reckless bioengineering and exposing Earth to potential alien contamination. The lab was shut down, and Elias was barred from conducting further research. But he wasn't ready to give up. Before leaving, he smuggled out a handful of seeds and retreated to a remote cabin where he could continue his work in secret. Years in isolation. For decades, Elias cultivated his alien-enhanced tomatoes in a reinforced greenhouse. The seeds grew into resilient plants capable of thriving in toxic soils and extreme weather. He tested their limits, exposing them to drought, flooding, and polluted air. Nothing could kill them. Elias also discovered an unexpected side effect: that tomatoes boosted human immunity. People who ate them regularly reported increased energy, faster healing, and resistance to illnesses. Elias theorized that the alien microbes were subtly enhancing human biology, though the long-term effects remain unclear. He kept his work hidden, fearing what would happen if the seeds fell into the wrong hands. But when the Great Blight devastated global agriculture, Elias realized he could no longer stay silent. His greenhouse became a beacon of hope in a dying world. Mara's arrival. Mara stumbled upon Elias's haven after weeks of wandering through the wasteland. Her community had been one of the last to succumb to the blight, their crops withering despite every effort to save them. Starving and desperate, she had set out alone, searching for a miracle. When she reached the greenhouse, she thought she was hallucinating. Rows of lush green vines stretched upward, their fruit glinting like rubies in the dim light. The air inside was warm and fragrant, a stark contrast to the cold, barren world outside. Elias found her crouched among the plants, a half-eaten tomato in her hands. She looked up, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was so hungry." Instead of anger, Elias felt a pang of pity. He offered her more tomatoes and listened as she told her story. Mara's village was one of many teetering on the brink of extinction. If nothing changed, they would all be dead within months. Elias hesitated. The seeds were powerful, but they were also dangerous. He explained their origins and the risk involved, but Mara was undeterred. "If we do nothing, we're already dead," she said. "Please let me try." Moved by her determination, Elias gave her a small pouch of seeds. He also taught her how to cultivate them and warned her to watch for any unusual behavior in the plants. Mara promised to return with updates. The seed spread. Back in her village, Mara planted the seeds in a barren field. Within days, the first sprouts appeared. By the end of the month, the field was a jumble of vibrant green. The tomatoes grew larger and faster than anyone had imagined. They were sweet, juicy, and incredibly nourishing. For the first time in years, the villagers had enough to eat. News of Mara's success spread quickly. Other communities began seeking her out, desperate for seeds of their own. Mara shared what she could, but always emphasized the importance of caution. She stayed in touch with Elias through a solar-powered radio, updating him on her progress and the challenges she faced. Elias listened intently, taking notes and offering advice. He was both proud and anxious. The seeds were saving lives, but they were also spreading beyond his control. Unintended consequences. As the seeds proliferated, strange phenomena began to emerge. In one village, tomato plants grew so aggressively that they overtook rain crops, their roots choking out native vegetation. In another, the fruit developed an eerie bioluminescence glowing faintly at night. People who ate these glowing tomatoes reported vivid dreams and heightened senses, but also bouts of paranoia and insomnia. Elias conducted tests and confirmed his worst fears. The alien microbes were mutating. The very adaptability that made them so resilient also made them unpredictable. He contacted Mara and urged her to monitor the plants closely. "If you see anything unusual, isolate it immediately," he warned. But the seeds were already out in the world, and not everyone treated them with care. A group of raiders attacked Mara's village, stealing their crops and burning the fields. So they believed the seeds were a weapon, a way to consolidate power in a lawless world. Mara barely escaped with her life, fleeing to Elias's greenhouse for refuge. A plan for the future? Elias knew they needed a new strategy. He couldn't stop the seeds from spreading, but he could try to guide their use. He began reaching out to other scientists, engineers, and community leaders, sharing his knowledge and asking for their help. Together, they formed a network dedicated to studying and managing the seeds responsibly. Mara became a key figure in this effort, traveling between communities to teach sustainable farming practices and warn of the risk. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful. "These seeds saved my village," she told Elias one evening. "They can save the world too if we're careful." Elias wasn't so sure. The alien microbes were a double-edged sword, their potential both wondrous and terrifying. But as he watched Mara rally people to the cause, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps together they could find a way to harness the power of the seeds without losing control. A fragile balance. The seeds of survival had taken root, but their future was uncertain. Humanity stood at a crossroads, caught between salvation and catastrophe. For Elias and Mara, the path forward was clear. They would fight to protect what remained of the world, planting the seeds of change one field at a time. The seeds had spread far beyond their origin, their roots entwining with humanity's desperate attempts to rebuild. What began as a beacon of hope was now a force threatening to unravel the fragile equilibrium of survival. For Mara and Elias, the fight had shifted from survival to stewardship, an uphill battle against human greed, fear, and the unintended consequences of tampering with forces they barely understood. The first shots. Greenfield was the first flashpoint. Once a bustling agricultural hub, it had fallen under the control of Cade, a ruthless warlord who recognized the seeds as the ultimate resource. His iron-fisted rule ensured that only his loyalists had access to food, turning hunger into a weapon. Mara has spent weeks infiltrating the surrounding settlements, planting the idea of rebellion. Farmers, mechanics, and even some of Cade's former guards had joined her growing resistance. They believed in her vision, a decentralized system where no one person could dominate access to the seeds. But Cade wouldn't relinquish his control easily. On a foggy morning, his soldiers raided a nearby village rumored to be sheltering resistance members. Mara watched helplessly as flames consumed the crops and homes, the acrid smoke a bitter reminder of what they were fighting against. This isn't just about Cade, Elias said when Mara returned to their camp, her face streaked with soot and tears. It's about what the seeds represent. If we don't take control now, someone else will. A plan takes root. Jarek, a former soldier who had joined their cause, suggested a bold plan, assault on Cade's fortress where he hoarded the largest cache of seeds. It would be dangerous, but if they succeeded, it would break his hold over the region and inspire others to resist similar tyrants. Elias worked tirelessly to develop tools to counter Cade's weaponized crops. Using data gathered by Anika, a biologist Mara had recruited, he created serum that could neutralize the more aggressive plant mutations. They also designed crude but effective flamethrowers, knowing they might have to burn entire fields to prevent further spread. The plan hinged on timing and secrecy. Mara led a team to sabotage Cade's supply lines, cutting off fuel and ammunition deliveries to his forces. Meanwhile, Elias and Anika coordinated with sympathetic farmers to stage a diversion of fake uprising designed to draw Cade's soldiers out of the fortress. The battle for Greenfield. The assault began under the cover of darkness. Mara's team slipped through the perimeter, their movements masked by the hum machinery and the rustling of mutant vines that coiled around the fortress walls. Inside, chaos erupted as the diversion took effect. Fires broke out in the outer fields and Cade's soldiers scrambled to contain them. Mara and her team used the chaos to infiltrate the central storage area where the seeds were kept under heavy guard. What they found there was worse than they had imagined. Cade wasn't just hoarding seeds, he was experimenting with them. Rows of mutant plants stretched toward the ceiling, their oversized fruits pulsing with an unnatural glow. Some emitted a faint hum while others twitched as alive. Elias was right, Mara whispered, her voice trembling. These aren't seeds anymore. There's something else. Before they could act, an alarm sounded. Cade's elite guards poured into the room, and the fight began in earnest. Mara's team fought valiantly, their makeshift weapons clashing against advanced Amoran firearms. In the end, it was Elias who turned the tide. Arriving with the serum and flamethrowers, he led a group of farmers in a desperate charge to neutralize the mutant plants. The flames consumed the vines, and the serum rendered the seeds inert, but the cost was high. Many lives were lost, and the fortress was left in ruins. The aftermath. With Cade defeated, Greenfield was liberated, but the victory was bittersweet. The destruction had left the town in shambles, and the mutant plants had released spores that threatened to spread even further. Elias and Anika worked around the clock to contain the contamination, their exhaustion etched into their faces. Meanwhile, Mara faced a new challenge, convincing the survivors to adopt a new system of governance. This isn't about me or Elias, she told a gathering of townsfolk. It's about all of us. We have to decide together how to use these seeds responsibly or not at all. The townsfolk voted to establish a cooperative with strict rules governing the cultivation and distribution of seeds. It was a fragile system, but it was a start. Seeds of division. Not everyone agreed with the cooperative's principles. Some argued that the seeds' potential outweighed the risks and pushed for more aggressive experimentation. Others, traumatized by the devastation caused by the mutations, demanded that the seeds be destroyed entirely. Among the dissenters was Jarek, who believed the seeds could be weaponized to protect against future threats. You think this is the last war over these seeds? He said during one heated argument. You're naive if you do. We need to be ready for what's coming. Jarek's departure marked the beginning of a new rift within the resistance. As Mara and Elias focused on rebuilding, former allies turned against them, forming factions with competing visions for the seed's future. A fragile peace. Despite the growing tensions, Mara remained determined. She continued to travel between settlements, spreading her message of unity and responsibility. In some places, she was met with hope and gratitude. In others, she faced hostility and skepticism. Elias, meanwhile, returned to his greenhouse where he worked on a new project, a genetically modified version of the seeds that would be immune to mutation. It was a risky endeavor, but he believed it was the only way to prevent future disasters. Every time I think we've solved one problem, another one sprouts, he told Mara one evening. But we can't stop trying. A new threat. As the seeds continued to spread, so did reports of new mutations. In one remote settlement, entire fields had turned into carnivorous traps, consuming anything that ventured too close. In another, a strange fungus had infected the crops, causing hallucinations and paranoia among those who consumed them. The world was changing faster than anyone had anticipated, and the seas were at the center of it all. Mara and Elias knew they couldn't fight this battle alone. They began reaching out to other regions, seeking allies who shared their vision of a sustainable future. But as new alliances formed, so too did new enemies. A shadowy organization calling itself the Crimson Veil emerged, seeking to seize control of the seeds by any means necessary. Their motives were unclear, but their methods were ruthless, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The fight continues. The fight for control was far from over. For Mara, Elias, and their allies, the seeds represented both humanity's greatest hope and its greatest danger. As they worked to contain the spread, rebuild communities, and fend off new threats, one thing was certain: the world would never be the same. But in the ashes of the old world, new roots were taking hold, roots of change, resilience, and the unyielding determination to survive.